Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and today is May 22nd, 2020, which means that as of today, we have completed 4 full years of Who'd Win and Why, which is just absolutely insane to me. In these 4 years, we have made 102 episodes, and of course there's more to come with the rest of Season 11, and there have been so many new developments with the show, and so many awesome discussions in the show, so to me it's just absolutely insane that we've done 4 years of all of that. And I've made celebratory videos for these kinds of occasions like this before, like for these yearly milestones of the show. Usually what I do is I like to count down my favorite episodes or my favorite seasons, etc, etc, but this time I thought I would do something different, not just because it's unique, but also because I think it will help you guys in case you have any questions about how Who, When, and Why works in terms of its rules. In this notebook, in this really dusty looking notebook, I have 10 rules written down for how I make Who, When, and Why episodes and how I analyze the fights. These are the rules that I've been using for a very long time now, and they're the rules that I intend to use for basically as long as I keep doing Who, When, and Why, unless something drastically changes for some reason. Now, there may be some episodes, some really early episodes in particular, that may contradict these rules, but as of right now, these are the rules that I use. And some of these rules may overlap with other versus shows like Death Battle, but some of them may not. So in case you're wondering specifically about Who, When, and Why works, I'm going to take a look at these 10 rules and basically just inform you guys on the rules that I do for Who, When, and Why. So without further ado, let's begin. Rule number 1. It is always a fight to the death. No matter what the fight is, no matter who the characters are, or what their abilities are, or anything like that, it is a fight to the death every single time. It's not a matter of who would get knocked out first, it's not a matter of who would just be defeated, it's a matter of who would die before the other character in a fight. Usually this isn't a big issue. Usually we have 2 characters, or 2 sides of characters, where all the characters could realistically die in a fight situation. However, sometimes there are complications. Sometimes we have characters like, let's say, Venom versus Carnage, or Sandman versus Clayface, where you know that left to their own devices, they wouldn't necessarily be able to kill each other in a random encounter because they just don't have the necessary tools or abilities in order to do it, because they have very specific weaknesses. And because in those instances only those weaknesses can kill those characters, sometimes it's just a matter of who has more weaknesses, or who's technically more powerful so that character still has a lesser chance of dying than the other character. And in those instances, and this is what's different from Death Battle, factors that are unrelating to the characters can end the fight, but again, it's only in these very specific cases where neither character can really kill the other when just left to their own devices. And this probably goes without saying, but borderline immortal characters are very unlikely to appear on the show. I would need a really good reason or a really good matchup in order to be able to do it, and even then it's still highly unlikely. But the bottom line is, it's always a fight to the death, no matter what the fight is. Rule number 2. No preparation time is given, only canonical knowledge of each other is allowed. This one is pretty self-explanatory. This one basically just means that the characters wouldn't have anything that they normally wouldn't have in a random encounter situation. If it's something that they wouldn't have for like 99% of the time that they're fighting, unless it's like a new power or ability they've gained which is implied to be a permanent development, then it won't be something that's included in the fight. It's only stuff that they have basically at all times on them during a fight. And if it happens to be a fight where there are characters that come from the same universe, then I will factor in canonical knowledge of each other, or at least I'll consider it if that exists. Even if they're from the same universe and they don't have really any canonical knowledge of each other, then they won't be given any sort of knowledge of each other. And of course, in any situation, there is no prep time given. It's always a random encounter, and they're just going with what they got. Rule number 3. No writer influence / plot armor / strictly plot constructed evidence is used. I think this rule is going to be the hardest one to explain, and some of you guys might even be questioning me on what I mean by this. I want to get this out of the way. This does not mean that we don't include feats. That's stupid, that doesn't make sense, and it's just not something that Who, When, and Why does. Of course we include feats. Basically what this means is that if there's something that a character does that's clearly just there to move the story forward, or if it's there to make it more interesting, then that stuff is going to be overruled by the stuff that that character should be capable of doing at any point. So on one side of the scale we have outliers. If there's something a character does that's ridiculously crazy, but it's clearly only there to move the story forward or to make it more interesting, and there's no supporting evidence for it, then that feat is not going to be taken in as high of a regard as the stuff that they can do normally, the stuff that they've shown to do more consistently. And on the other side of the scale we have characters like Flash, as in while he has been caught off guard by characters that are significantly slower than him, and while he's not always shown running at ridiculously faster than than light speeds, we know that he can run at ridiculously faster than light speeds at his best. So that stuff is going to be held in a higher regard than the stuff that's shown literally just to make it more interesting to read or watch, or because it's plot constructed. Because of course you're not going to have Flash running at that speed all the time, because then you really don't have a story. I guess the best way to put this is what they display is really important. Like the feats, they're really important. But I would say that the classification of the characters, like if they're like a mutant or a super soldier or a superhuman or a peak physical condition human, that stuff is just as important to consider as the feats that they show. And if you're still a little confused by what I mean by all this is what I like to call the Spider-Man versus Venom effect, which is while yes, Spider-Man can beat Venom time and time again because he can outsmart him, and you know, he's the hero and Venom's the villain, in a realistic, no preparation time, random encounter, battle to the death, Venom is stronger, tougher, more versatile, and Spider-Man has no way to kill him if he can't take advantage of his weaknesses, which he wouldn't be able to do in like 99% of the random encounters, unless the environment plays a factor into it. So you know, realism is really key here. We're trying to see what would realistically happen and compare the characters directly. And of course, plot armor, i.e. staying alive because the plot intends for you to stay alive, also isn't taken into account. Again, realism is key. Rule number 4. All official material is valid unless it is contradictory to the primary/original source material. Of course, the primary source material is where most of the information should be coming from, and it's what should be held in the highest regard. For all intents and purposes, it is the most valid information. However, the other official material is still valid too. And obviously, I don't mean stuff like fan-made material. I mean still official material that is made by the same companies. For example, a superhero cartoon based off of a superhero from a comic book, stuff like that. Of course, again, as long as it's non-contradictory and consistent. Basically, this kind of stuff is mostly going to be used as supporting evidence for stuff that we can prove from the primary or original source material. And there are some things that just won't be included for various reasons. For example, the MCU is actually a completely separate universe in the Marvel multiverse, just like 616, so using stuff from MCU doesn't really make any sense. But regardless, that's kind of how it goes. Primary source material is obviously top priority, but then other supplementary official stuff can still be used for stuff like supporting evidence. Rule number 5. Morals are off during the fights. However, personalities and fighting approaches stay on. All this one basically encompasses is that if characters won't kill normally, they'll kill here. If characters normally hold back, they won't hold back here. But that's really all that changes. Stuff like pacifism may still be analyzed in an episode, but it's not to say that the character won't kill and therefore they can't win, but it'll be more along the lines of it means they don't have the best fighting experience, or something like that, as long as the pacifism directly proves that, etc., etc. And it's really important to stress that the fighting approaches and the personalities do stay on, because we're not just analyzing the abilities and the powers, we're analyzing the characters, and what they're likely to do can sometimes be really important to a fight. So it's not just the powers, we are still analyzing the characters. It's just that if they hold back or if they don't kill, then that's all out the window for a who, when, and why fight. Rule number 6. All characters are analyzed at their maximum potential unless it severely conflicts with their most common or most accurate representation. This is one that definitely strays away from Death Battle a little bit, and I want to make this clear, most of the time, their most accurate representation is them at their best. Like 99% of the time, that is the way it goes. However, it's clear that there are times where a character's best isn't how they're most accurately represented all of the time, or most commonly represented, and I'd personally rather analyze a character at their most accurate rather than at their best, because at that point there are times where giving a character more power is actually misrepresenting them because it's not them at their most accurate, and this usually comes from something external. I'll try to give some examples on both sides. For example, giving Ben 10 Alien X makes sense, because even though Alien X is ridiculously powerful, it's still something that Ben has access to all of the time now. So if you weren't going to give Ben 10 Alien X, it would actually be limiting him in an unfair way just for the sake of the fight. And then there are characters like Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch's power fluctuates immensely, but because there's really no set power level for her, analyzing her at her best is just the most natural conclusion. It does the character the most justice. And I think it's also important to bring up that characters that have instant win moves or are immortal, that stuff isn't just pushed to the side or excluded just for the sake of the fight, because at that point that's misrepresentation. And if you're going to change that much about a character, then there's no point doing the fight like that anyway. So I just thought I would bring that up in case some people thought, oh, immortality is always removed, or instant wins are always removed. No, that's just straight misrepresentation. But now let's go to the other side of the scale and talk about characters where their best isn't their most accurate. For example, I would never give Thanos the Infinity Gauntlet in a fight, because the Infinity Gauntlet is not his, the Infinity Stones are not his, and it makes him ridiculously powerful, even though it's not something he would normally have in a random encounter. That just doesn't make sense to me. Also, giving Nova the full Nova Force doesn't make sense to me either, because he normally has his own portion of the Nova Force, just like how Green Lantern has his own portion of the Green Lantern power. You know, it's not like we're going to give Green Lantern all of Ion, so we're not going to give Nova all of the Nova Force, because again, that's just misrepresentation. And of course, we wouldn't give Superman infinite power, because even though his maximum potential is limitless, it's not something he can realistically reach just by draining in solar energy more and more. It's just an impossible circumstance, so that would never happen either. And again, I want to stress that a character's best usually is a character's most accurate. Those things are rarely ever separate, but there are very specific circumstances where there are things that a character may have sometimes, which is external, which is something they wouldn't normally have in a random encounter, which makes them insanely powerful or something like that. That kind of stuff would not be analyzed, because again, that's just misrepresentation as far as that character's most accurate and most common state of being. Rule number 7. There is no outside help allowed. However, inside help is still valid. This is one where I think a lot of people are going to be like, what the heck do you mean by that? And this is one that I'm almost 100% sure that Death Battle follows as well, but they just never say it out loud. For those of you guys that don't know, there's a reason why they refer to it as no outside help and not just no help. Just like with Ben 10, there are some abilities that some characters have that if you were to just take them away for the sake of the fight, that would be misrepresenting the characters. If it's just for the sake of the fight, that would be handicapping them in an unfair way. For example, Dr. Doom can summon his Doombot army whenever he wants. And also, for example, sometimes Aku Aku will step in when he thinks that Crash needs help if Crash is ever in a fight. Now, these things at this point make it so that it's not just the one character fighting. You have your Doombots and you have your Aku Aku who's protecting Crash. But that is not outside help. That's not an outside resource that they're using. It's what I like to call inside help, something that they always have access to, and something that they shouldn't just not have access to for the sake of the fight. It's just in their power set naturally. And of course, there are a lot more characters out there who have abilities like this, but I think you guys get my point. There are times, however, where a line does have to be drawn. For example, even though Batman could realistically call Superman into a fight whenever he wants, Superman is not unique to Batman. You know, oppositely how Dr. Doom's Doombots are unique to Dr. Doom. So that kind of stuff wouldn't be taken into account. You know, I think it's pretty clear to say when it should and when it shouldn't be. Rule number 8. The size of the advantages that a character holds is held to a higher regard than the number of advantages that a character holds. That was basically a really fancy and convoluted way of saying quality over quantity, at least most of the time. I've seen a number of versus shows on YouTube where it seems that they just have like a checklist of categories, and whoever wins more categories just ends up winning the fight. And while I can understand that to a certain degree, I definitely don't use that when doing who, when, and why analyses. And the reason for that is because we can't assume that all categories are equal, especially not in every single fight. We can't just assume that someone's strength advantage is the same as the other character's speed advantage. That's just not fair. That's not a really in-depth analysis in my opinion. And there are fights on my channel where the character who does have more advantages does end up winning, because quantity is still important, or sometimes quality and quantity goes to one character, but not all the time. There are a number of versus debates that I've done, most notably that I can think of, Shrek versus Wreck-It Ralph and Deathstroke versus Raiden, where the loser technically held more advantages than the winner, just looking at it through a straight checklist, but the advantages that the winner had were by such a huge margin, were so overwhelming, that the quality completely overshadowed the quantity, and that is definitely something that can happen in certain fights. And sometimes other similar things could happen. For example, one character could hold 2 advantages in a fight, and another character could hold 4 advantages in a fight, and it could still be very close, etc., etc. It's all about interpretation, and every single fight is different. There are some fights where some categories just hold more of an importance than other fights. Other fights have some other categories that are more important for various reasons. And yes, there can be times where just one advantage held by a character in a fight could be enough to win the fight. That's very unlikely to happen, but sometimes that can happen. It's just based on the characters. Again, every fight is different, and we can't just look at it through the lens of a checklist. Rule number 9. There is no limit for how many times a character can return to who'd, when, and why. It doesn't matter how many times the character wants won. It doesn't matter how many times the character lost. I'm always willing to bring back characters on the show if it makes sense to do so, or if I really like the fight idea. It's more about the fights rather than the individual characters. Keep in mind though that I still choose which fights end up on the show, and I may not want to bring a character back if they keep coming back so excessively, or for other various reasons if that's applicable. And technically, because of the new Who, When, and Why style, where there's like images that I'm using, it's technically less likely that a character that has been used really recently will be coming back, just because it means that a lot of the information is going to be repetitive and the images are going to be repetitive, because there's only a certain number of images I can find on the internet of a certain character. Regardless though, other than that, there's really no limit for how many times a character can come back on the show, so just keep that in mind. Rule number 10. Every single fight that happens on Who, When, and Why must be suggested by one or more viewers. Every single fight has been suggested by someone who watches the show or just knows about the show, whether it's through a YouTube comment or a direct message by one of my friends, or just in person by one of my friends. It's always going to be by someone who watches or knows about the show. Always. That's never going to change. Like I said though, it's still obviously me who decides which fights get on the show and which ones don't, so I still just have to pick the best ones, or what I feel are the best ones from the current selection that I have, and I still try to get as many different people's ideas in as possible. And this doesn't mean that the unused ideas are bad, it's just sometimes really hard to narrow it down to just 10 fights per season, and sometimes it's just a matter of my level of familiarity with the characters. So it's just part of a process. This doesn't confirm or deconfirm that I'll do any fights or anything like that, it's just all part of a process. So guys, that was the official rulebook for Who, When, and Why. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any more questions about how Who, When, and Why works, you can leave it down in the comments below and I'll be sure to clear anything up. If you have any questions or any more questions that doesn't have anything to do with this video, just anything else, just leave it down in the comments below. I'll be sure to clear that stuff up. And if you enjoyed this video, please give this video a huge like. I always appreciate the likes. Comment your comments. If you could subscribe to my channel, that'd be so great. That would really help my channel out. But regardless, I'm just so happy that we've made it to 4 years of this show. It's been an incredible ride and I can't wait to keep going. So thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And that's it for me. I will see all of you guys in the next video. Peace out.